welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Our panelists are already lined up, so let's convene today's summit. And allow me to introduce our distinguished panelists for this evening. Carice Witte, founder and executive director of Signal. Dr. Gedalia Afterman, head of the Asia Policy Program at the Abba Eban Institute for Diplomacy at the Rachman University. And Bradley Bowman, senior director at the Center on Military and Political Power, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Hello all, and thank you so very much for joining us this evening. And today's topic, after cementing his rule for at least another decade, what will Xi's China look like? Let's take a closer look and pick up the conversation right after.
China's president, Xi Jinping, has secured an unprecedented third five-year term as the leader of the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, making it all but certain he will also cement a third term as China's president come the government's legislative sessions in March of next year. The CCP also announced its 7-member-strong Politburo Standing Committee, the equivalent of a presidential or prime ministerial cabinet, stacked with Xi loyalists. Absent from the lineup is a clear successor to Xi, with the Standing Committee's youngest member now 60 and a median age of 65 years old, a sign that Xi has no plans in stepping down anytime soon, as Xi scraps his predecessor's collective leadership model and ascends to become China's most powerful leader since Mao Zedong. Has China returned to one-man rule? What are the global implications?
So let's get to it. Maximum Xi. Is Xi Jinping the strongest man in the world at this point in time? As always, we begin with a quick fire round of 30 seconds each and pick up the conversation right after. Carice Witte, please take the lead.
It's absolutely arguable that he is the strongest leader in the world. Not only has China's tech strength increased notably, but also militarily and global reach. And he's constrained by the limits of the checks and balances that you have in a democracy by term limits. He now has his third term and likely leader for many years to come, given the fact that he's heading 1.4 billion people and a huge treasury. He looks like the absolute strongest leader in the world.
Dr. Gedalia Afterman, your 30 seconds are on.
I would say that he's not yet the strongest leader in the world, but I think the changes that we're seeing around us, the international changes, are leading him in that direction. First of all, we've seen Putin become much weaker because of the war in Ukraine, and we also see instability and unpredictability in the U.S. system. So if we talk in 2 or 4 years, I might say that he is the strongest leader in the world.
Okay, I'm marking it in my calendar to circle back to you in 2 to 4 years. Last but not least, Mr. Bradley Bowman, your take?
He's certainly the most powerful man in China, and he's a heck of a lot more powerful now than he was a few weeks or a few months ago. It's worth noting what he's using this power for. He's using this power to consolidate his personal autocratic rule. He's using this power to consolidate the control of the Chinese Communist Party over China, and he's using it to implement a more aggressive foreign policy and to establish more control over the Chinese economy. So I think now more than ever, we have to put aside the fiction, the idea that there's such thing as a private Chinese company, and we have to get ready for aggression in the Taiwan Strait. In my view, that is more likely now than it was before.
Okay, and we'll get to all of these topics in a split second, but let's begin, and obviously feel free to interact from this point onwards with the basic question. Will Xi's third term be about continuity, hence a certain level of predictability, or about reforms? Carice.
If we're talking about continuity with respect to Xi Jinping continuing to tighten and have more control over the economy, over the people, over education, over the culture, yes, that will continue. If we're talking about continuity in economic control with tightening and more regulation with respect to the private sector, I have to agree with the former speaker that we will see more and more socialist-oriented economic goals. That was stated in Xi's speech. I don't see reform as the reform and opening that was the concept of Deng Xiaoping. That seems to be in reverse.
Mr. Bowman, this element of predictability, is it a bit alarming from Beijing's standpoint?
I think in the past we've seen Beijing pursuing a policy of biding time and hiding their strength. As my colleague Craig Singleton has published recently, in some ways what we're seeing is a gift to the world because they're no longer really hiding their strength and hiding their motives. They want to remake the international order in Beijing's authoritarian image, and they're willing to use force to do it. He explicitly said, they are willing to conquer Taiwan with force if necessary. So if that's not a wake-up call, I don't know what is. And as Ukraine teaches us, deterrence is a heck of a lot cheaper than dealing with aggression that we could have avoided in the first place.
And Dr. Afterman, what is China's main concern now? Is it the same main concern she has at this point in time?
I think China's main concern is the well-being of the Chinese people. I think Xi's main concern is his own leadership, the leadership of the Communist Party, and making China, great again, returning China to its leadership role in the world. Now, there's some connection between the two, but I think the priorities are different. And I think Xi will be willing to sacrifice some of the Chinese people well-being to push his ideological goals forward.
And
just to say something about reform, I think this term she will be a reformer, but perhaps not in the sense that we're hoping for, right? Not opening up to the West, but it will aim to change China quite a bit. If he wants to achieve his dream of making China the world leader, China has to overcome many, many challenges. And him bringing together a lot of power in his own hands will, he hopes, allow him to achieve that. Whether or not that works, I'm not so sure, but that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to really transform China.
Well, before we discuss the way things are looking from the west side of the divide, let's dive in further into Beijing. This new Politburo policy, rather loyalty over quality. Any prospects of an internal uprising within the party ranks, or any chance of that is simply demolished by this new outline of the Politburo, Carice?
There was no chance even before the new the 20th Party Congress. There were a lot of rumors, and I think maybe wishful thinking on the part of some, but Xi Jinping is so firmly in control, and we saw that he basically decimated the Youth League faction, which Hu Jintao was part of. He was the one who was removed from the closing ceremony. Li Keqiang, the current premier, he's leaving. The two Politburo members who were part of that faction are leaving. So I think we can say that there's no chance of any even whisper of disagreement internally.
And Dr. Afterman, you've mentioned Russian strongman Putin in your opening remarks. Closely watching, obviously, what is going over Putin at this point in time. Let's put it that way. Perhaps that will be more accurate. Putin's miscalculations. Is she miscalculating the dangers of an echo chamber, or in other words, is she himself his own greatest obstacle?
Yeah, first of all, I would think that she is watching what's happening with Putin very closely, and particularly the sense that Putin had a false sense of confidence in his own military. And I think she would be worried about that when it comes to the Chinese military. But I think the issue that you point to is a very important issue. I think in China these days, there's a sense that no one wants to bear the bad news to the boss higher up, and that definitely could lead to strategic mistakes and to Xi not necessarily having the correct picture of or correct risk assessment when it comes to some of his strategic decisions concerning Taiwan or other issues. So I think it is definitely a danger.
And Mr. Baumann, you've mentioned earlier the issue of tech giants, those restraining mechanisms on private businesses. Will Chinese tech companies or Chinese business elite play by Xi's rules? Do they have another chance?
I don't think there's any question that they will. They largely already are. You know, for too long in the West, I'd say both in the United States and, dare I say, in Israel, we've had this idea of private Chinese companies. I think that's been a fiction for quite some time. Every company, I would argue, is either already working for the Chinese Communist Party or is one phone call away from doing so. Do we really believe there's any CEO in China that would say no to the Chinese Communist Party? And I think that was true a year or two ago, whether we realized it or not, and it's more true now. And we better wake up. Otherwise, we're going to continue to see the theft of intellectual property that's going to be used for a whole number of reasons, including building Chinese state champions. They're going to put our businesses out of business and to build the combat power of the People's Liberation Army.
And
can I ask maybe in response to that, do you think, I mean, when I'm looking at the situation and I see, for example, the latest export control legislation in the US when it comes to microchips, what worries me is that China in some ways will be pushed into a corner where it will have to be forced. If you ask me, I think China will be able to achieve technological capabilities with or without the West. It might be delayed 5 or 7 years, but if we in 10 years reach a situation where China reaches, has this technology, has these capabilities, and the US has no leverage over it, and the West has no leverage over it, what do we do then? So when I'm looking at it, I think this kind of zero-sum game on technology is quite problematic from a Western strategic viewpoint. So I'm interested what you both think about that.
If I can jump in and just say, I think that China was on its way. It's been talking about self-sufficiency and independence for years, and certainly over the last 2.5 years. China was going to do it anyway. Yes, this may push the leadership to ramp it up, and we have seen, even before this the chip restrictions, we've seen a huge amount of investment by China into the effort of developing chips. So I think this is inevitable, and the U.S. really needs to work at upping its game, as opposed to, I mean, it's one thing to try to hamper China, but if it doesn't also run faster, as I think Jake Sullivan put it, then it's going to lose the game. There's no question about it. Xi Jinping, as you said, Gedalia, is looking to make changes to turn China into a successful socialist country. And I think when we're asking, what is his biggest challenge, I'm not sure how he's going to square that circle. Because if historically, socialism has not brought the kind of economic strength that it requires to be a superpower. So I think that's going to be his biggest challenge.
Bradley Bowman, in the little time we have left, your concluding remarks for this part of the conversation?
I think we need to avoid strategic narcissism where we say that everything is a reaction to us. I think we need to remind ourselves, as H.R. McMaster said, that sometimes others have agendas and that they're pursuing regardless of us. I think the Chinese Communist Party agenda is clear. It's a matter of how we respond. And I would agree that the U.S. needs to up its game, but there's also a suggestion I hear in some of my counterparts of false choice. Of course, we need to up our game, but we also need to be honest about what China's doing and not help them do it.
And on that note, we will conclude the first part of our conversation, and we'll continue from this point exactly right after the break, as we wonder, is she good or bad for the West? And the answer might not be so intuitive as you may think. So we're taking a very short break, but Carice, with Dr. Gedalia Afterman and Mr. Bradley Bowman are all staying with us, so do not go anywhere.